Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the session on what's new in higher education cybersecurity programs. My name is Kristi Luttrell, and I am an assistant professor in the Mathematics and Computer Science Department at Seton University. This afternoon, I am pleased to introduce the following speakers. First, we have Keith Barros. Keith is the Senior Director of IT Security at Seton University, and he will speak on cybersecurity internship programs at Seton University. Next, we have Robert Cohen, the Global CIO of Technology at Prudential Real Estate Investors and an adjunct professor at Seton University. And Robert will speak on meeting the needs of corporate cybersecurity. Finally, Demetrios Roubos, the founding director of the Office of Information Security and program manager of the eSports program at Stockton University, will speak on game hacking on the NES. We will end this session with a great panel discussion led by Joseph Ingemi. He is the principal consultant at Panaris Technologies, and please feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A chat box, and we will address those questions at the end during this panel. I will now hand it over to and welcome Keith Barros.
Thank you, Kristi. Several years ago, the provost office and our interim provost at the time, Dr. Barros, had a meeting with some individuals about creating this cybersecurity certificate program at Seton Hall. And we were fortunate enough that she asked our CIO and myself to be part of that discussion, and listening to what they were thinking of doing on the academic side, we said, what a great idea it would be if we could join, join with the academic side to help give these students a better education and make them more prepared for the workforce. So in doing that, I looked at what my team needed, and like everybody in cybersecurity, and especially in higher ed, we're all short-staffed. So we figured the best way to do this would be to put together either an intern program or a student worker program for the students that were in the Seton Hall Cybersecurity Certificate Program. And that's what we did. The students go through a boot camp as part of the academic program in the summer, which is a preparation for the program itself and information on how to get certified from the CompTIA Net Plus and SIC Plus certifications. And then from that group, they can apply for a work study, or not work study, but a work program with us in our cybersecurity team. And we've had anywhere from 6 to 10 students an academic year working for us. And it's worked out really great because they provide the university with a good service in that they are doing actual work that relieves my team, my full-time team, from having to do some of these lower level tasks, and we can concentrate on higher level, more rewarding tasks for my full-time team, and the students get to learn real tools, real processes, and real programs that help them as they apply for jobs. So for instance, we have them as our level 1 security analysts. And one of the first things we teach them to do is how to look at reported phish, right? So somebody gets an email, they think it's a phish, they push the report phish button, it goes to our phishing mailbox, and the students are the first ones who look at those. And they learn how to look at the email headers, they learn how to take links and send them up to VirusTotal to see if there's anything suspicious about them. And then if they see it's a real problem, they then forward it over to my team to take the next step in the investigation. So they get some real hands-on level 1 type analyst work. We also teach them how to use industry tools, the tools that we use here at the university. So these are not games, they're not simulations, this is the real work. So we teach them how to do vulnerability management, we teach them how to do threat hunting, we teach them how to do antivirus, we teach them how to do basic analysis in our Splunk environment. So again, when they graduate and they start looking for jobs and interviewing, they can tell their potential employers, not only do I have this class work, not only do I have the certificate, maybe I've gotten my Net Plus, my Security Plus certifications, but I have real hands-on experience with these tools. And we've felt we've been fairly successful in that about 75% of the student workers who graduated from the program are all now working in cybersecurity. And they're not all analysts. Some work in identity management, some are working as analysts, some are working in other fields of it, because when all our students are not cybersecurity majors, some are business majors, some are psychology majors. We had one's a communication major. He's going to be speaking later in the day in the life. so they come from various backgrounds, but we educate them, we mentor them. And one of the things that's worked really well is Eric Lopez, who is our security architect for the university. He is the person who teaches the boot camp, and he then mentors these students as they work for us, as he's their kind of their supervisor, if you will. And he gives them real things, gives them hints and recommendations, and mentors them along the program as well. So it's a good relationship, and it's a good atmosphere for the students. And even now with the COVID, we've been able to bring some of them back to work for us, working remotely, because they are quality students, they are trustworthy, and we give them access to the tools they need remotely, and they're able to continue work and to continue their experience. And that's been very good. And some of our vendor partners, some of the products we use, have also helped by giving free classes to students on how to use the tools, how to do threat hunting. Sam Curry, who gave our keynote this morning, has spoken with some of our students, and they've actually offered summer internships with Cybereason so they can get some more experience. They've been beta testers for some of their certification tests. So the students really get a good hands-on experience. And I think that's what's really needed in the industry today, as we look to hire students, is they have some real world experience. It's not just the academic certification. And we encourage them to get the Sec Plus certification, because this way they have that certification stacking. They have the certification from Seton Hall, they have their bachelor's degree from Seton Hall, and then they have the Security Plus, which is, opens the door for a lot of job interviews. And the first year we did it, excuse me, one of the students that was with us was a senior, and he only had 1 year of experience with us. And he interviewed on a couple of jobs, and the feedback I got from the job interviews, was that he was very enthusiastic and he was very knowledgeable. I wish he had had a couple of more years working for you, because he just didn't have the depth. So now we're trying to get the students enrolled earlier as freshmen and sophomores, so that they have a couple of more years to work with us and to really spend some time learning the different tools. And we try to we don't give them all the same tools. We try to tailor the tools based on their interests and their experience. And also some of the tools, like Cybereason and some of the others, they offer certification programs themselves, and we encourage the students. We don't insist on it, but we encourage the students try to get those certifications as well, so that they're adding all these little pieces that are really looked for in the job hiring process. And as I said, we've had several of our students have successfully gotten jobs in cybersecurity. They're doing very well. They're working for government agencies and so forth, and large corporations. And I think this is something that's very positive. And I think this conference and other marketing programs that we're doing within the university and outside of the university to try to, highlight the success the program has had, it'll help more students to be able to get jobs, since there is such a need for cybersecurity people, in this industry. And the more of them that we can have work for us, the better it is for the university as well, because we're obviously more secure with more eyes on things and more people doing all the different things they need to do. And I think one of the biggest things that we like is that the students leave and then they continue to talk to us after they graduate, looking for recommendations and suggestions and stuff, because the relationships are built between my team and the students, so that they're comfortable coming back and saying, hey, I'm thinking about looking for this job, or should I, one of our students that just recently graduated reached out to me and said, he wants to go get a master's degree. And he said, should I do a master's degree in cybersecurity? Should I do an MBA? And we had this long conversation about what is best for his, and the question, of course, is, where do you want to go with your career? It's not us telling him, but we talked about this for about an hour, and then he was making his decisions based on that. And so it's a good relationship. And part of it is also that I think, which helps us in a little bit at Seton Hall anyways, I was an adjunct for 16 years before I came to work for the university while I was out working in industry. Eric was an adjunct at another university before he came to work at Seton Hall. Our CIO, who's my boss, Dr. Landry, was an academic at Seton Hall. So we all have kind of an academic background, as well as, cybersecurity and IT backgrounds. So we can help the students kind of, put the two pieces together: the academic side, which they get the great education from Dr. Minimere, and then our portion, what we see in the industry. And we really do, and I have to give a lot of credit to some of the vendors like Sam and the folks at Cybereason, who have spent a lot of time helping our students become more successful, because they also see the value in taking these young people and helping them get to where they need to be.
Okay, thank you very much, Keith. I think that's a common theme that I'm hearing this morning, is that it's very important for students to have a little bit of experience too before they go out, whether that be through internships or through, working with different companies before they enter into the full job working force. So thank you, Keith. Up next, we have Robert Cohen. I'll go ahead and hand the mic over to you.
Okay, thank you, Kristi. And I'm going to be speaking about meeting the needs of corporate cybersecurity and kind of tying that into the certificate program that we have at Seton Hall. So let me just bring up the presentation. So again, I'm going to kind of try to cover meeting the needs of corporate cybersecurity. First, just a little bit about my background. So as mentioned, I'm currently the CIO of several of our investment businesses at Prudential. Our business is a global business, essentially an investment management company. And my role specifically is being responsible for the global management of technology. And that includes managing a large staff. I have about 200 people around the globe that are programmers, business analysts, and quality assurance testers. And many of them have as a primary concern building business applications, but as an additional important responsibility, ensuring that our systems and our platforms are secure. And my team is really responsible for both in-house development, where we're writing our own code, and also vendor management, where we're reviewing what products we use from a vendor and what the security requirements are in terms of bringing on those products. In addition to that, as mentioned, I am an adjunct faculty member here at Seton Hall and teach several classes in the cybersecurity certificate, as well as some business classes for the Stillman School of Business. So let's talk a little bit about the needs of corporate cybersecurity. I kind of break this area down into three major areas. The first is having a good security organization. And that includes governance, and it really includes having talented people that can understand the policies and implement them, and really run a security organization and continually evolve to the challenges that are at hand. So there's a lot involved in the security organization itself. Second thing that I think about is employee training. And, it's a very overused phrase, but it's really true that you're only as strong as your weakest link. So, if you have employees out there who are going to fall for phishing tactics and give confidential information out in places that they shouldn't be doing it, it's clearly an area in terms of corporate cybersecurity that is extremely important. And that includes keeping your people trained and really knowledgeable about what they're doing on the network platform. The thing that comes to mind as an example of that is, everybody has their stories, but, our story is where one of our senior executives' email got hacked. And, in and of itself, it doesn't sound so bad. So they've got his email, they can get into his email, but they can't get into our corporate systems. They don't have any of his personal information. So what can they really do here? And of course, you know, what they attempted to do was email a relatively low-level worker in our corporation, trying to come off as though they were at this particular executive and telling this lower level person to wire several $100,000 to a specific bank account. You know, coming from an executive, that lower level person got pretty nervous. Is he supposed to just be following this instruction? But thankfully enough, he was trained enough to know that, you know, you've got to ask people before just acting on using our wire transfer system, even if you do have, you know, access to that. The other thing that was obviously in place is several levels of approval that would have to be done before a wire actually transferred to money to a certain account. So, but just an example of where that employee had to know to just not blindly follow this executive's actions, because they actually weren't coming from this executive in that particular situation. Finally, the third component of programs that are very important in kind of a corporate environment really have to do with the programs and policies themselves. So, you know, the idea of engineered devices really is simply the fact that you've got, you know, depending on the size of your firm, thousands to tens of thousands of devices that you need to manage. And so to do large scale patching in an emergency where a patch needs to be put on for a security reason, you need to have the ability to have standardized operating systems, standardized devices, and the ability to automatically get at them through the network. An independent security organization, that kind of goes to my top point around the security organization itself. But what I would try to kind of describe here is that it's very important to have the security organization kind of over the wall, if you will, or in a place where they can review what our software developers are doing and asking them, is the right security in there? So, you know, our software developers' primary goal is really to get a application that helps our business out the door and working and running. And they really don't like anybody that's in their way to doing that. And that may be QA testers, it may be security people who are going to ask them questions about their program and what they've built and their application and how it works. But here, this is very important to have an independent security organization that is willing to slow the developers down, ask the important questions, and verify that the applications being put into production are secure and well written and well managed from a security standpoint. And then the last three components of the program, the types of programs that are pretty much very important to corporate environments, include the private wide area network, things like firewalls and proxy servers, and the ability to do intrusion detection and penetration testing, and all the standard capabilities that you would expect in a cybersecurity program from a corporate perspective. So, with that, I'll go to a little bit about our cybersecurity certificate program at Seton Hall. And Keith gave a great perspective of both the internship program and the boot camp. So I'm not really going to cover them. And I'm going to go more into the latter part on this slide around the courses in our certificate program. And, you know, just kind of mention that, you know, what we've got here is basically 12 credits of courses in one is informatics, another's organizational psychology. We also have law. And then finally, we have a capstone project in cybersecurity, which requires our students to really get in deep on a particular project and all the aspects of cybersecurity involved with it. So recognizing that this is our certificate program, I teach in 2 of these specific classes, and I'm going to talk about these 2 classes in a little bit more depth, just to give a feel of the types of things that are covered in these classes. So in our law and policy class, first of all, the contents, what we really cover, the internet history, networking infrastructure. Even though this is to a large extent a law class, there's a bunch of technology that is really covered in here. And it includes, what are firewalls and routers and proxy servers, and how do they work? And, before we can get to the law and regulations around them, we talk about what they are. And, so there's a technical component to it. We do get into the current regulations that include the CFAA, which is the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and we also get into additional regulations. I'm going to give an example of that in a minute. We talk about governance models, or really the lack thereof, governance models in the cybersecurity environment. We talk about legal jurisdiction. Who has jurisdiction? If I'm a company and have all my users in Europe and I'm running a website that's based in the US, and there's some kind of legal problem that comes up there, and maybe as a company I want to sue the vendor of this website, well, who has jurisdiction, the US or the European Union? Not easy questions to answer. We also cover some of the basics around domain name servers, net neutrality, and privacy in this law and policy course. The final thing that is a component of this course is a research project on a real corporate data breach that occurred, and we attempt to get into the financial and legal impacts of the data breach, along with really what was the root cause of the data breach. The students are really required to dig into why they think this occurred, how it occurred, and then they act as consultants, and their goal is to give recommendations on how to prevent the specific breach that occurred here from ever occurring again. So with that, some of what this class also gets into is what are the legal responsibilities of corporations that have some type of data breach. And I'm going to use GDPR as an example of that. GDPR stands for General Data Protection Regulation. It's an EU law. So I'm going to kind of take this conversation global a little bit and talk about GDPR. And I'm going to bring up a slide here that has a ton of facts about GDPR. There's 9 bullets here. I'm not going to read them all. I'm not going to cover them all. But what I'm going to do is really kind of discuss the bolded items here. There's 5 bolded items, and they are the important components of GDPR. So GDPR was meant to be a single standard data protection regulation for all member EU states. And part of it is that if there is a breach, the fines are very stringent. They can total 20 million euros or even more. The requirement of GDPR is that companies disclose this breach within 72 hours. 72 hours may sound like a lot of time. I can tell you that for a global firm, recognizing a breach, finding it, determining impact, and going public to the regulators in 72 hours, for large companies, that's like jumping through hoops. That means you've got to move and really escalate issues that may or may not be issues, escalate them very quickly until you know they're not in fact a breach and you can lay off them. So, this requirement of GDPR is non-trivial. They require this regulation requires that companies provide consent to EU citizens in terms of sharing their data. And so the regulation really restricts the transfer of a citizen's data outside the EU without their consent. So, that's a lot of words around GDPR, but that's the bulk of it. That's GDPR, became enforced in May of 2018. It is one of the newer regulations in Europe, and any global organization that has, operations in Europe. So, my software programmers on my team that work out of Europe, and our sites in Europe are fully responsible for adhering to this regulation, knowing the regulation and being able to manage to it should we see a data breach occur. So that's pretty much it on the law and policy course. The other class that I wanted to talk about briefly, just to give people a feel of it, is our informatics course. And our informatics course really comprises the idea of information systems in various domains and operating systems. We teach programming and software development in Python, and we also give a good background in managing data structures. We do some basic data visualization, and we also do kind of a demonstration of programming, both client server and object-oriented programming. So from this, students hopefully get skills in being able to do some hands-on forensic analysis, some ability to kind of get into data using Python to do it, and so an ability to parse what is important data from many large data sources. So this kind of ends up being one of the backbones of our certificate that really allows students to get some hands-on tools at their disposal to work with data and to do kind of cyber forensic analysis. So I will stop there in my presentation and turn it back over to you, Kristi.
Thank you very much, Bob. That was really informative. Next up, we have Demetrios.
Good afternoon, folks. My name is Demetrios from Stockton University. Give me just a moment here to share my screen with you. Okay, so I'm CISSP certified, GISP. I work at Stockton University as their information security officer, and I also adjunct in the computer science program where I teach a computer organization course that focuses a lot on hacking games. So that probably sounds unusual, but it's a really good opportunity for students to take a crack at the assembly programming language and to really get a good understanding of how computers work at a low level. So with that being said, let's take a look. So today we're going to look at an introduction to the 6502 instruction set. So the Nintendo NES utilizes a 6502 processor. The 6502 uses 1 byte opcodes and a 16-bit address space, which is based on memory pages that are 256 bytes each. There are 56 supported instructions on 6 registers, and X, Y, and A registers are utilized heavily throughout this. So what I'm going to do is recommend that you follow along using the MassWork 6502 instruction reference. You can just Google MassWork 6502, and I will see if I can. It doesn't look like I can necessarily drop this in chat. Maybe I can. Okay. So yeah, have a look at that while we go along. So the 6502 instruction set has a lot of low-level instructions, as you might imagine, right? So if you've ever looked at assembly language before, there's a lot of commands: add with carry, increment, stuff like that, right? So we're going to take a look at how you can hack NES games using some low-level debugging techniques, and by looking at some of these instructions and understanding how they work. So that being said, you've got the 56 instructions, and along with those instructions, they all have addressing modes that apply to them, right? So there's different addressing modes, including absolute. There's also indirect, relative, zero page. So there's a bunch of different ways that these instructions can interact with memory, okay? So the idea is you do an instruction, let's say ADC, it's an add with a carry, and that add with carry can apply directly to memory, it can apply indirectly to memory, it can take a value, so there's a lot of different ways that can be applied. Okay, so if you happen to be looking at that mass work table, right, the table tells you both the opcode and the addressing mode of an instruction, right? So you can refer to Appendix A if you want to see a nice little table of all that. But this here is a visual representation of all the bytes and the instructions and their addressing modes, right? So for example, here we can see ADC with an indirect Y address, ADC with a 0 page and an X offset. So the table really breaks down how all these commands work. Okay, so that being said, let's take a look at Appendix A, which shows the details for each instruction, including how many bytes total that instruction is and the opcode that's utilized. Okay, so in this case, we're looking at an ADC command that's add memory to accumulator with a carry operation. So there's a bunch of different addressing modes that could be utilized here, including immediate, 0 page, absolute, and indirect. Okay, so each one of these has an opcode associated with it, right? So this column here for opcode is a 1 byte instruction that you would find directly written onto the cartridge for an NES game, right? So let's say an NES game has an ADC command, you would find either a 6.9 byte, a 6.5 byte, so on and so forth. Now, along with that, there is this column for how many bytes that instruction is. So the first byte of every instruction is the opcode, and then every subsequent byte is going to inform that instruction on what to do next, right? So for the example here with immediate mode on the ADC, what happens is the first byte tells you that it's going to be an ADC command, and then the second byte is going to be the number that you actually want to add to the accumulator with a carry, okay? And that this occurs in 2 cycles. So similarly, a 0 page, this is going to be 2 bytes. You would see 65 in memory first, followed by a byte that informs you where to go to look for the value to put in memory. Okay, so just a little bit of an overview on how this is going to work. So that being said, one of the important instructions that we're going to be utilizing to do our magic here is the NOP instruction, right? So if you're familiar with debugging applications and potentially hacking them and stuff like that, a lot of times utilizing the NOP instruction is an important tool, right? Because it allows you to patch out functionality at a very low level. Okay, so what happens is the NOP instruction is used to tell the CPU not to do anything, right? So what we're going to find ourselves doing here is actually replacing instructions that would be doing something with instructions that don't do anything. So that probably sounds, you know, pretty straightforward, right? So the idea is that we're going to find a segment of the code that we're interested in, and we are going to patch that out, essentially. So before we get into the specifics of that, let me talk a little bit about the game Genie. Okay, so the game Genie is a device that temporarily modifies game data. So this is, you know, assuming you have a physical NES, right? So if you have a physical NES, you can insert your cartridge into one end of this thing and then insert the entire assembly into your NES. And the device will temporarily modify the game data, allowing the player to cheat, manipulating various aspects of a game, and sometimes accessing unused assets and functions, right? So how does it work? Well, you've got the console, you've got the game cartridge, and then you have the intermediate intercept device, right? So the intercept device can intercept the code that's being transferred from the cartridge to the console, and it can change certain bytes, right? So we have sort of a basic diagram here of how the thing works, right? So you have the edge connector for the console, you've got the edge connector for the actual cartridge itself, and then you have some buses here that essentially intercept certain commands, right? Certain instructions. There's also a little flow chart here that shows essentially how that happens, right? So game execution will begin. The console requests a read from external memory, assuming that that address is the one that we want to replace. It'll go and replace it. If not, it'll skip it. So pretty straightforward. And the idea is that you specify which bytes on the cartridge that you want to intercept and change. Okay, so let's take a look at this game. In this game, a player is required to complete a given number of laps on a track. So we have some instructions here on the cartridge, right? So we increment 1200, which is to increment our lap count. We then load that into the accumulator. We then compare that with the number 3. So assuming that we're at our 3rd lap, we would then branch, if not equal to location 200A in memory. Otherwise, we would jump to the race is complete. Okay, so essentially what happens here, if we look at this assembly code, is the comparison is made to see, has the race been completed, right? Have we made it to lap 3 yet? And if we have not made it to lap 3, the game branches and essentially the race continues. However, if we have made it to lap 3, the race is then completed, right? So you can imagine what might happen if we were to patch out this instruction with a NOP, right? Things would obviously work differently, right, in the game. So let's take a look at how the Game Genie encoding works. We're not going to dwell on this too long, but it is pretty interesting, right? So you could use this table on the left here to encode or decode Game Genie characters. So if you're familiar with a Game Genie, you probably know that it relies on codes that are either 6-digit or 8-digit codes. So those codes correspond to both a 15-bit address and an 8-bit data byte, that you then patch, right? So the opcodes, you'll remember, are 1 byte in length. So the idea is for every one of these codes, you can patch out 1 byte of the game cartridge. Okay, so for example, if we were to enter the code gossip into our Game Genie, it would correspond to a 15-bit address as well as an 8-bit data byte. Okay, so there's some math obviously that happens here to make all that happen. So to decode gossip into its 15-bit address, we have to do some ands, some ors, and some bit shift operations in order for us to determine the address on the cartridge that we want to patch out. And in addition to that, there are some additional ands, ors, and bit shifts that occur for us to determine the one 8-bit data byte, so that we know, given the address and the data byte, where in memory we're going to go to look to replace the code and what we're going to replace that code with. So in this example with the code gossip, whenever the CPU reads from the address D1DD, the Game Genie will intercept the read request and it will return the byte 14 in place of whatever byte was stored in that location on the cartridge. Okay, so effectively we're patching the code out on the cartridge and replacing it with opcodes that we have engineered. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to show you a somewhat practical example, I guess, of how you would do this. So it's really broken down into 2 phases, and we're going to use emulators in order to accomplish this. So the first thing you want to do is identify a game that you want to hack, right? And then you can launch the game with a emulator called BizHawk, right? And BizHawk is pretty common emulator. You can identify an interesting characteristic in the game. So let's say, for example, you want to control the number of lives that you have left or something along those lines, right? You would then identify a memory location where that interesting characteristic is stored. And then you would freeze and poke memory to determine if what you're doing has the desired effect. So that all takes place in BizHawk. It's nice, easy interface to use. Then once you've identified that address and the relevant data values, you can then launch the game with an emulator called FCEUX, and then you can add write breakpoints for those memory addresses. And what you're doing here is once you've identified where in RAM these things hang out, you have to then go to the cartridge and actually patch these out. So it's really a 2-step process. The first is, where in RAM are the values that I care about? But then you have to actually go back to the cartridge and patch the code on the cartridge, right? So that's what we're doing with these write breakpoints. So we add a write breakpoint to find out what cartridge instruction is writing to memory. And then once we do that, we use the debugger to inspect the instruction, determine its opcode and data, and then we use the cheat window to patch the opcode, right? So sounds like a lot, but it's actually super simple. So let me show you how this works. So first thing that happens here is you take a look at the game that you're interested in, right? So you identify an interesting characteristic, things like how many lives you have left, how many moves you have left, your current power level, the amount of time you have left, right? So you identify something like that, right? In our case, we're going to look at how many lives are left. So what happens here is you identify the memory location where that characteristic is being stored. So you can do that using change counts. So the BizHawk emulator allows you to inspect memory and then step through your application. And as you step through, you can see the memory changing, and you can see how frequently it changes. So in this situation here, you're going to, let's say, take an intentional death in the game, and you're going to see what changes in memory when that happens, right? And you essentially are going to, with trial and error, whittle down where this is happening in RAM. Okay, so we can see here in this case, memory address 34 had a previous value of 3. It now has a current value of 2. One change has occurred. So we sort of put 34 on the list of things that we're potentially interested in, right? And there may be other memory addresses that follow this, right? So once we do that, we can then freeze that memory address and verify whether or not that behavior is actually, consistent with what we thought. So in other words, in this case, we want to see, did we actually prevent ourselves from losing lives if we freeze this memory address? So in other words, we're holding that constant now. So in this case, we did correctly identify the address where this is taking place, and we have verified that memory address 34 is the one in RAM that we're interested in. Okay, so now that we have memory address 34, we're going to go into that other program I mentioned, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to add a write breakpoint in memory for memory address 34. So when we do that, what's going to happen is it is going to debug the application, and it's going to stop running the application when anything writes to memory address 34. So we had previously identified that 34 contains the number of lives that we have left. And when something writes to it, that means we probably died or we gained an extra life, something along those lines, right? So that being said, we're going to run the application and activate the breakpoint. And then you can see that when we actually do wind up taking a death, the debugger will stop here at the breakpoint. And it'll show us the address that we're at, in this case, C345. It'll show us the instruction or the opcode, which is D6, and it'll show us the data byte, which is 34. The way this is actually shown, in a human-friendly format is decrement address 34 with an X, right, with whatever's an X there. So D634 is actually what's in memory, and this is a 2-byte instruction. Okay, so we can see D6 is a 0 page with an X offset, and it's D6 with 2 bytes. Okay, so now that we know that, we can actually create our patches. So we have the ability to use the cheat window to create these patches. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back to that opcode I had mentioned before, because D634 is essentially the decrement operation that's making you lose a life, right? So when this happens, you're losing a life in the game. 34 being the memory address we identified previously. So what happens here is we are now taking the NOP opcode EA, and we are patching both the instruction and the memory address with NOP codes. So in other words, when the 6502 processor gets to this instruction, instead of it decrementing the memory address 34, it simply does 2 no ops, which means nothing, right? So it does nothing there. And as a result, you wind up not losing lives, which is super cool. So basically what we have here is pre-patch C345 on the cartridge is D634. And then post-patch, C345 and 346 are both EA. So in other words, we've effectively patched out the decrement instruction with no ops. And as a result, we don't lose any lives in the game now. So yeah, You can actually take that a step forward and actually extract the NES Game Genie codes, and you can effectively create your own Game Genie codes using this technique that will work in the field on physical hardware. So even though you're developing this on an emulator, you can actually then apply this to the physical hardware in the real world. So the idea is your patch will temporarily replace the code read from the game cartridge, and that's about it. So hopefully that was succinct and it made some sense.
Thank you, Demetrios. That brought back many memories.
That's funny.
Now I'll turn it over to Joe. Joe, would you like to lead the panel discussion?
Sure, I'd love to. And just to, as my bio said, I am the owner and principal consultant of Panaris Technologies. I'm also an adjunct professor at Seton Hall. I teach the capstone course, Projects in Cybersecurity. So if there's any questions offline, I'm more than willing to ask them. So, I mean, I've got a couple quick questions here. I think some have been answered already in the chat box. So just to get things off started, I mean, we have a very diverse group here. When we say cybersecurity and we talk to 5 people, we probably get 10 different answers of what that really means. There's so many aspects of it, so many different job details, and they differ from company to company. So if I'm a student and I want a career in cybersecurity, whatever that means, tell me some of the classes and the coursework that I should be doing and looking at, and some of the internships I should be doing. I think we've already kind of talked about that. Get the CompTIA Security Plus certification, and we talked about, let's kind of drill down for all the students out there. What are some classes I should be taking, even if I'm not a computer science major? And that's for the group. So any of them in the panel want to respond to that?
Yeah, Joe, I'll jump in for a minute. So in my view, there's no real right or wrong into which exact classes you have to take. I think if you're attending a school that does have either a certificate program or a major, it becomes somewhat obvious what classes you want to take. But you also want to make sure that you have a good background in the STEM classes, whether it's computer science or whether it's math or engineering. You want to have some solid fundamental background to rely on in terms of trying to approach a cybersecurity job. And you also want to have some depth of business acumen, and so maybe some business courses, or maybe some courses that give you a background in addition to some of the tools and techniques that you can take out of, let's say, computer science or programming or engineering courses, that kind of thing. So that would be my perspective on that.
Yeah, and I can add to that as well. It depends on what you're looking to do and what background you're looking to get into. So if you're looking at cyber law and you want to go, so take a look at some of the law classes. I think certainly business classes are extremely important. As I mentioned before, choosing between a master's degree in cybersecurity or an MBA, it kind of depends on where your career is headed. If you're a psychology major, maybe taking some courses and looking at how people behave online, so you can kind of look for correlations, because a lot of what our analysts do is they're really looking for correlations, right, of something that doesn't look right or normal in the behavior of what's going on, whether it's human behavior or machine behavior. So I think those are some of the, some things to think about.
Great. Another question I have, in full disclosure, my company also does some consulting in Atlantic County. So I've been working on the e-gaming aspects of Atlantic County, where Stockton is. So it's kind of great to see, Stockton getting its due recognition here, where Demetrios works and teaches. And so my question will be a little bit directed towards the e-gaming side, but we could probably more generalize it. Transferable skills. I mean, we just read in the Economist, gaming engines are used by drones. They're used by production studios. So could we talk a little bit about transferable skills? So I'm into e-gaming, and I guess maybe this is directed mostly to Demetrios. What are some skill sets you think are transferable to cybersecurity? And maybe, maybe we can elaborate more on, what you said, Bob, about, business skills. What business skills are we looking for? Let's talk about transferable skills in that multidisciplinary aspect. So maybe Demetrios, you want to kick off first, and we'll go from there. I hope that question was clear.
Sure. So thank you. I think that there are a lot of transferable skills, particularly in the realm of computer science and data science, both with respect to sort of tournament engineering as well as production. And really, if you want to prevent players from cheating, right, even though I just talked about hacking games and stuff like that, there's a lot that can be done with data analytics and other things of that nature to sort of see, are people being honest and stuff like that. So I also think that there's a lot of overlap with respect to business and esports, right? So esports is extremely broad, and it's really growing. So, the reality of it is, if you're a technologist, I think that esports is a great field. Whether you're into production technology or you're into computer security or software engineering or database administration, really, I think there's opportunities across the board. Networking and infrastructure, obviously designing low latency networks, and there's a lot to it, right? So a lot of people, I think, sort of misappropriate gaming as just an entertainment thing, right? But there's actually a lot of engineering that goes into creating esports, right? So I think that regardless of what technological background you come from, there's an opportunity for you in esports if that's something that you're interested in. And I also see that as an industry with a large growth potential for upcoming graduates, right?
Any other? I've always believed like accounting is a great field for cybersecurity in terms of the auditing aspects of it. Anything else? Any other cross-disciplinary analysis maybe our other two panelists can see between?
Joe, I think your point is well taken. I think accounting and business classes really allow you to transfer skills. I would almost say that we should step back, though, and maybe even try to generalize it more than that, which is just being able to communicate well across disparate fields is a great thing to be able to transfer. Being a software engineer, but being able to communicate to business folks and vice versa, there's a need for that kind of transferable skill just from a communication standpoint. So I think that's a big aspect of transferring skills.
Great. And I think we're heading now towards time. We'll let people get to the keynote address. So let me just ask very quickly, any closing thoughts on, especially to the potential students here, or even adults that are looking for career changes, and with the economy, they've been displaced. Any thoughts, final thoughts on how to really get into cybersecurity? I know we've talked about it now, but any parting wisdom?
I think just explore as much as of the environment as you can, as quickly as you can, and ask questions and talk to people in the field. Most of us are open to speaking with anybody as we can help provide whatever help we can.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I would say go as broad as you can, especially in an undergraduate capacity, right? So go broad and let your interests be your guide, right? So I think that you want to get as much surface area as you can as an undergrad, and then you can spend your time as a graduate student or as somebody who's looking for a specific certificate. You can spend that time going very deep and specific.
All right. Well, I think we've covered it. I don't have any questions in the box right now, and I think we have to break a little bit early. So without further ado, I'll turn it back to Kristi.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you all for attending. You'll notice in our chat, we have the link to attend the keynote at 1 p.m. where we will be having Mike Garrity, the State of New Jersey Information Security Officer and Director of the NJCCIC. And again, that link is in the Q&A box on the right-hand side. Thank you.